The leaked post-race data from Qatar finally exposes the truth behind Max Verstappen's shocking collapse in pace, and the numbers are far worse than anyone imagined. Despite a perfect launch that took him from 6th to 4th in only a few seconds, the RB21 fell apart so dramatically that Red Bull is now considering the most desperate solution of the season to save his title fight. The new evidence confirms violent bouncing, massive balance swings and tire destruction that left Verstappen defending instead of attacking, while both McLaren drivers escaped with critical championship points. Before we dive into the full story, make sure you subscribe right now, because this new Qatar data changes the entire outlook of the championship battle. The Qatar sprint revealed immediately that Verstappen was fighting a car that had lost all its competitive structure. His launch from 6th to 4th masked the deeper technical crisis inside the RB21. According to the leaked report, Verstappen's opening move past Fernando Alonso and Yuki Tsunoda was executed with flawless precision and lightning reaction. Yet the data shows that once the race stabilized, the RB21 could not maintain the rhythm of the front group, and Verstappen fell into a pace that reflected survival instead of attack. The dramatic separation from the leaders began almost instantly. Oscar Piastri, George Russell and Lando Norris maintained consistent laps in the 1:24 range, while Verstappen dropped out of DRS in only 2 laps. The analysis shows that the RB21 lacked the grip and balance to match the leading trio across the full lap. Verstappen's times fluctuated as the instability worsened, and his hopes of challenging for a podium vanished by the midpoint of the sprint. The first major reason behind the collapse was the mechanical bouncing Verstappen suffered everywhere on the lap. This was not the aerodynamic porpoising from earlier seasons, but a violent suspension compression that caused the car to jump over curbs and under braking zones. The internal data confirms that the floor repeatedly disconnected from the track surface, causing immediate loss of stability. Verstappen had to brake earlier, lift more frequently, and avoid aggressive curb usage to keep the car under control. The second structural problem came from the unpredictable balance shift inside the RB21. Verstappen reported heavy understeer during corner entry that suddenly flipped into oversteer during the exit phase. This contradictory behavior forced him to slide the rear tires aggressively on Qatar's abrasive surface. The combination of heat and sliding escalated the tire temperatures beyond the working window, and the RB21 lost grip rapidly. Once the tires overheated, Verstappen could no longer push without risking a complete loss of control. The leaked report also highlights the gap between Verstappen's setup and Tsunoda's configuration. Tsunoda chose a more conservative rear end that delivered greater stability, allowing him to set a stronger qualifying time. Verstappen, by contrast, used an extremely aggressive front end that the chassis could not support without bouncing. The contrast in data revealed that Verstappen's direction amplified the RB21 weaknesses, turning the sprint into a battle against his own car rather than against his rivals. The championship picture now reveals the full impact of this pace collapse. Verstappen scored only 5 points, while Piastri added 8 and Norris gained 6. The updated standings put Norris on 396 points, Piastri on 374 and Verstappen on 371. This means Verstappen now sits 25 points behind the leader and only 3 points ahead of Piastri with 2 races remaining. Every lap on Sunday carries championship consequences, because another poor result could end his title campaign before Abu Dhabi even begins. The most urgent question for Red Bull concerns parc ferme. The engineers must choose whether to keep the broken setup for the Grand Prix or break parc ferme entirely and start from the pit lane with a rebuilt car. The leaked data suggests that the RB21 in its sprint form cannot challenge McLaren or Mercedes across race distance. The decision now becomes a defining moment of the season, because Verstappen's entire championship hinges on whether Red Bull risks everything to give him a stable car or hopes he can survive one more race with a machine that has already shown its limits. The core problem behind Verstappen's collapse in Qatar was that the RB21 never entered a stable aerodynamic or mechanical window. The sprint exposed a car that delivered sharp rotation in the opening seconds, but immediately fell into imbalance as the tires warmed. The leaked data shows that the front end initially responded with precision, allowing Verstappen to attack aggressively, yet that behavior vanished as soon as the chassis encountered sustained lateral load. The car ceased to provide a predictable platform, and Verstappen was forced to adapt lap by lap instead of building the structured rhythm he normally uses to control race pace. The instability worsened the moment tire temperature crossed the lower threshold. Verstappen encountered heavy understeer on corner entry, which pushed him wide and forced him to lift earlier than expected. This loss of rotation disrupted every phase of the lap, and the RB21 responded with inconsistent grip that deteriorated quickly. As the tires heated further, the front end stopped biting entirely while the rear end began to lose traction under acceleration. The sprint then shifted from performance management to damage limitation because Verstappen could no longer commit fully to high-speed direction changes. Mechanical bouncing became the second critical issue that shaped the entire collapse. The internal readings show the suspension absorbing curb impacts with excessive vertical movement, causing the car to skip rather than settle. This behavior appeared consistently at the same locations around the lap, especially into braking zones where Verstappen relies on micro-stability to place the car with millimeter precision. Each oscillation disconnected the tires from the surface and erased both grip and confidence. The data leaves no ambiguity. The RB21 could not remain planted long enough to produce competitive cornering loads. As these two problems compounded, the tires began overheating far earlier than Red Bull projected. Qatar's abrasive surface punishes sliding, and the RB21 created that condition on almost every lap. The soft compound climbed beyond its operating range and the rate of degradation increased sharply. Verstappen had to reduce entry speed and soften throttle application to preserve the remaining grip. The sprint format offers no tools to reset tire condition. Once the compound crossed its thermal boundary, the drop in performance became irreversible and Verstappen's pace collapsed relative to the front group. The competitive profile of the leaders intensified the problem. Piastri, Russell and Norris all maintained lap times inside the 1:24 window, while Verstappen drifted outside that pace almost immediately. The leaked timing charts show that his deficit grew sector by sector as the instability increased. Without DRS, Verstappen lacked the aerodynamic support needed to retain contact with the top three. Every lap widened the gap and removed any chance of recovering lost ground. Instead of challenging for podium positions, Verstappen became vulnerable to pressure from behind, a situation rarely seen in his recent seasons. The post-race comparison to Tsunoda revealed another dimension of the problem. Tsunoda's more conservative configuration offered consistent balance even if it was slower over one lap. Verstappen's aggressive front-end setup increased peak performance potential but destabilized the car in race conditions. The leaked analysis concludes that Verstappen's configuration placed structural demands on the RB21 that the chassis could not sustain under sprint intensity. This mismatch between setup philosophy and circuit characteristics amplified each underlying weakness until the car no longer behaved within a competitive window. The final and most impactful problem is the championship consequence. Verstappen's limited fifth-point haul allowed Norris to extend the lead to 25 points and brought Piastri within 3 points of Verstappen. The data confirms that this collapse was not a momentary dip but a structural failure of the RB21 to operate in Qatar conditions. Unless Red Bull corrects the mechanical and aerodynamic imbalance before Sunday, Verstappen risks losing control of the championship with only Abu Dhabi remaining. Qatar exposed a vulnerability fierce enough to alter the entire title trajectory. Red Bull's engineering group entered the post-sprint analysis facing a level of pressure they had not experienced at any other race of the season. The leaked data showed clearly that the RB21 had behaved in a way that deviated from every simulation model and every expected performance pattern. Engineers were forced to confront the fact that the setup chosen for Verstappen placed excessive structural demands on the chassis and that the car could not maintain aerodynamic load once the tires reached their operational peak. This made the engineering challenge not just a matter of fine-tuning but a fundamental recalibration of how the car generated stability across a full race distance. The most urgent engineering concern was the mechanical bouncing Verstappen reported from the earliest laps. The internal suspension traces reveal that vertical load spikes occurred far more frequently than the team predicted. Instead of absorbing curb impact and stabilizing quickly, the RB21 oscillated in a way that compromised braking performance and eliminated predictability. Engineers identified this as a suspension-based problem rather than an aerodynamic one, meaning that the chassis itself struggled to maintain controlled compression and rebound. Under park-firm restrictions, there was nothing the team could adjust during the sprint, and this placed Verstappen at the mercy of a car that fought him through every corner. The aerodynamic stability issues created another layer of pressure. The aggressive front wing angle that Verstappen selected was designed to sharpen initial rotation. However, the leaked analysis shows that paired with a stiff rear platform, the configuration produced a narrow balance window. As the tires warmed, the aerodynamic center of pressure shifted rearward, creating the entry understeer Verstappen complained about. When the rear tires overheated, the opposite issue appeared and the car snapped on exit. Engineers saw from the telemetry that the balance shift was structural, not situational. No amount of in-cockpit adaptation could fix the fundamental misalignment. Tire behavior added a further engineering burden. Qatar's surface punishes any car that slides, and the RB21 produced more sliding than any other top team. The degradation curve displayed a steep rise in temperature after only a handful of laps, meaning Verstappen's tires experienced thermal runaway. For engineers, this removed the possibility of any pace recovery, because once the tires cross the threshold, the compound loses grip in a way that cannot be reversed. Red Bull's entire strategy for the sprint had assumed the RB21 would protect the soft compound better than McLaren or Mercedes, but the opposite happened. Communication between Verstappen and the pit wall intensified the engineering pressure. Verstappen's feedback was detailed and consistent. He described specific corner phases where the car lost stability, and he warned repeatedly that the rear tires were entering thermal distress. Yet, because park firm restrictions were in effect, Red Bull could not act on his feedback during the sprint. Engineers were forced into a passive role, gathering data they already knew would paint a bleak picture for Sunday. The inability to intervene created a sense of urgency, because every kilometer Verstappen completed generated more evidence that the car needed significant structural correction before the Grand Prix. The comparison with Tsunoda's setup added a critical element to the engineering discussion. Tsunoda's more conservative configuration delivered a calmer rear platform and sustained balance even as the tires aged. Engineers used this comparison to identify which elements of Verstappen's configuration amplified instability. The contrast revealed that Verstappen's aggressive direction intensified the RB21's natural sensitivity to heat and load transfer. This meant the sprint exposed weaknesses that would remain for Sunday unless Red Bull intervened decisively. Engineers now had concrete evidence that the solution required more than a small correction.